Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here, and we have an amazing group of panelists with us to discuss the role of the private sector in the DPI space. As the session has been titled, the DPI, the marketplace for private and DPI. So as I look at the landscape and I've watched this a few times, I think the interaction between the private sector and DPI happens in a few ways. One is during the build phase, where I would, let's say, point to Tata Consultancy Services, which helps governments build infrastructure as a service provider. The second kind of infrastructure that we've seen is where the private sector builds, owns, operates the infrastructure, which is like a Mastercard is another example of that, right? The third kind of private sector role in the DPI space, we don't have representation here, but it is the startups who build on DPI, right? And the fourth kind of interaction between DPI and the private sector is the hosting and other whole host of services that DPI requires, and we have Rohini here from Microsoft to represent that. And so I think the mix of the panel is we have 3 people from the private sector and 2 representing the public sector, Vaijayanti from the World Bank and Sanket from the Government of India. It'd be good to see the different perspectives on the important questions of the interaction between the private sector and the government as far as DPI is concerned. So I've prompted each of our panelists with one opening question, and we'll build on it as we go along with the rest of the questions. I have my first question to Vaijayanti. The World Bank has obviously been a big player in the digital space for the longest time, and a lot of your contracting happens when you give loans to countries with the private sector. So how does the World Bank view the role of the private sector in the digitization work that goes on? Is the World Bank's view that the interaction of the private sector in the digitization journeys that we've seen in the past different from how you perceive their role in the DPI space? Would love to get your opening thoughts. And as you think about the role of the World Bank in the loans that you give for digitization, how much of the money do you think actually, if you give a loan of $100, how much money ends up in the hands of the private sector, approximately? Would love to get your thoughts.
Thank you, Madhukar, and thank you to Carnegie, and for all of you who are still here on a Saturday afternoon, almost evening. So in terms of how we define digital public infrastructure as the foundational digital building blocks for public benefit, and I think it's important that the public benefit as opposed to for public sector or by public sector. And it does require, as a result of that, a paradigm shift in thinking. I think many of us who've been working on this agenda talk about the rails that allow for not only transforming countries' public sector services and service delivery, but also for allowing private sector innovation to build on top. And so as a result, it's a different way of thinking than the more traditional digitization projects where it's more inward looking and by government. And here it requires, and for it to be sustainably leveraged, is to not only think about it for public services, and public services might be the first usage that we see of DPI, but for it to be sustainable really does need to leverage private sector and the innovation on top of that. And like you said, there's sort of different models of how we would think about the role of private sector, and traditionally it's as a vendor or operator, but really what changes things with DPI is private sector as a user. I do think that we need to spend more time. I think we talked about this. We don't often bring in private sector as much as we should when designing some of the foundational DPI layers, and particularly on things like the ones where government clearly has a role, like on ID and digital ID. And I think that more and more we should be increasingly thinking about that. But we see it in the usage. We see it, for example, here in India, and I'm sure we'll hear about it, the time that it takes to onboard customers for large banks for $23 to 15 cents, I believe, if that's the same, or for a SIM card from 24 hours to 4 minutes. Or in Brazil with Pix, now deals with about, I believe, 60% of payments, and about 8.5 million businesses are leveraging Pix. In Thailand, we know with Prompt Pay and the federated ID is also being used for a number of things of customer onboarding, fast G2B payments, and other digital services. So I think across the board, across countries, the usage is there. And I think we're going to only see more and more innovation, whether it's around data sharing, user empowerment of data. And so I think it's to see what's in store in the future. To your question about how much of the World Bank programs go to private sector, I don't have an exact figure. I do know that for example, for digital projects or for payment projects, probably about 80%, don't quote me on this, but about 80%, whether it's for software or for professional services or for some of the compute. So a vast majority, but that's the more traditional as a vendor operator. But what people might not also realize is that the bank has other ways of engaging other than, for example, through our development policy loans or our policy dialogue, where it's working with countries to change the regulations that unlocks private sector, whether it's around for payments, like opening up the market and for new market entry, or for thinking about the reforms that are needed, whether it's around business registration or new licenses. Even here for startups, we hear so much about being encumbered by all the massive number of licenses and things, and so the reforms that are required. So I'm not going to put a number on it because I think that doesn't show the true value of the role that we play when unlocking private sector value.
Thank you, Vajayanti. I'd like to bring in Hiba. You work with Mastercard, and you've been interfacing in your current role with a number of multilateral organizations. What are you hearing from these organizations with regard to the role of private sector, and how do you view the role of Mastercard itself in this broader DPI conversation? It'd be great to get some perspective from you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and to Carnegie for hosting a wonderful event. You know, people here heard me just say this is one of the best conferences I've been in for a while. So thank you for having us being part of this great initiative. So, you know, my role is really, I'm leading Mastercard engagement with international organizations. And it goes beyond, obviously, DPI, but since 2022, I have to say that my conversation with international organizations has centered primarily on digital public infrastructure. And that includes the World Bank, obviously, which is playing a very important role in this area, and also the United Nations, UNDP, the Office of, the name changed, it's a Special Technology Envoy, Envoy in Technology, but I think it has changed recently, so don't quote me on that. And many others in the International Monetary Fund as well. So we've spent quite a bit of time trying to understand what digital public infrastructure is. I mean, the question of defining digital public infrastructure took a while to shape up, and the India G20 was instrumental to finally bringing together the ecosystem to coalesce around a common understanding of what it is. And I think the definition has been evolving and getting deeper and clearer as we went along. And the definition is important because, you know, until we know what we're talking about, it's hard to negotiate an agreement around what we are doing. And the public piece of digital public infrastructure probably was one of the parts of it that galvanized a lot of heated debates. So when you ask me about what we have been hearing from the international organizations, within that context also it was taking a while for the international organizations to bring us on board into the discussion, because it was perceived for a while as a public sector-led effort. But the conversation has opened up more recently, and some organizations are better at doing that. I would give credit to the World Bank in the sense that it has always been better than other organizations at bringing the private sector to the table and consulting, and they do a lot of ecosystem assessments and a lot of, so this has been happening very well. Maybe on the United Nations side, it's taken more time to get to that point. But I want to specifically point to a very important report that came out of the World Bank on the 11th of March about digital public infrastructure as an instrument for development. And the way that the report went into defining the role of the private sector, I would say is fantastic. And as it gets socialized, it will open up more space in that regard. And it states it very clearly that the private sector is central to the digital public infrastructure agenda. It's central to the success of the agenda. And we have seen that, I mean, now that the technology is robust, that there is global endorsement that this is a very important piece of the journey towards digital transformation, that it is important for many countries that are at an earlier stage or have more limited capacity. I think that the way this report positioned the ecosystem will contribute a great deal to enhancing and deepening the dialogue around the role of the private sector. Your second part of the question was, where does Mastercard fit in? So Mastercard, I mean, when you look at the payment layer, obviously the digital public infrastructure payment layer comes in as a new player in an ecosystem that we have been in for a while. So in that sense, and it depends on the market and so on, we may be in a sort of a competing providers relationship where Mastercard and other payment networks are offering a payment option that competes with a DPI payment option. So this is one relationship that exists, and with it comes a certain package of dynamics and policy choices and policy conversations. At another layer, we are also potentially, and in some markets we already started doing that, being a service provider atop, like a fintech, because Mastercard is a fintech at the end of the day, providing overlay services. And in other situations, and that doesn't mean in different situations, sometimes all happen at the same time, we're a collaborator. Like I can see, for example, our fraud management or cybersecurity. This is typically a collaborative process, takes a lot of alliance and cooperation, public-private cooperation and ecosystem cooperation. So you can see situations where this is happening as a collaboration in terms of strengthening the entire ecosystem. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but our relationship to a DPI is multi-layered, and we see ourselves as like contributors to the success of the ecosystem. And also we see a big opportunity. Like, I'll leave you with one piece of data that we were discussing before the session is, since 2016, since the introduction of Aadhaar, the number of credit cards have doubled from between 2016 and 2020. The number of credit cards in the ecosystem in India have doubled. So in that sense, we're beneficiaries of DPI as well, and I can add that to the different ways in which we interact with the DPI ecosystem.
Thank you. A very useful context there. I want to bring in Sanket as the government representative. I think it'd be great to get his perspective. I think if you look at the DPI landscape, right, there is a certain class of DPI, which is, I'd say, typically digital ID, which is government-owned, government-built and managed by the government, operated by the government. There is UPI, where government has a major, and the regulator has a big role, but it's really a combination of technology in the markets, and the combination of smart regulation, smart technology and markets, that triangle has to work. In the case of account aggregator, for instance, it's mostly a technology and marketplace play and with very light touch regulation, right? So there are shades of DPI where government involvement needs to be more, needs to be less, and so on and so forth. I'd love to get your perspective, Sanket, on how the government has viewed some of these. And I feel, as I look back, as somebody living in India, government has made some deliberate policy choices over the years. And some have landed well with the whole population, some have landed well, not so landed well with the private sector, for instance. And so, how has the government been thinking about this? What have you been hearing from the private sector as you engage on all of these questions?
Thank you, Madhukar, all my fellow colleagues. Thanks, Carnegie, Rudra and team. So, see, what the question you asked, that's the beauty of the Indian policymakers. Like, I will start with my earlier assignment. It was the physical infrastructure, roads. So basically, let's go into the fundamentals. Any infrastructure, if you take the physical infrastructure, so it's like the design, build, own, operate, or the design, build, own, transfer, or the design, build, own, and any other process. Because the private sector have its own expertise, it can finance with the cutting edge technology, a lot of benefits. In the same way, the examples you gave of UPI, of account aggregation, or even DigiLocker, let me tell you, so there is not like everything will fit in one box. We have to be very flexible. So now when this started, it's not like it started yesterday or overnight and one fine morning we are talking about this. No. It's about a digital India, which is almost a decade old campaign we started. And in 16, 17, we saw the UPI coming and the COVID during the COVID times, the DigiLocker recently and all. So basically every DPI, we need to understand, first of all, the pulse of the market and even the nuts and bolts of the field. Because it should be citizen-centric, user-friendly and accessible. So you can't, again I will say, you can't put all the eggs in one basket. We have to be very thorough, very flexible and very, I will say, customize what is needed. That is where our Ministry of Electronics and IT, we played an important role to bring the private partnership into this. We have fantastic examples of UPI, where Google and PhonePe have used our APIs and done wonders. We have the other example of even, I will say, Aadhaar integration with Jio's eKYC, and see the verification cost. Almost 90% of the cost of verifications have come down. I have many other examples. We see the space program. Yesterday I was listening to Nandan Nilekani sir and he was mentioning about the space system, and see many of the startups coming up, building up the 3D designs and all. And that's the wonder. We have the PME Vidya, I'm looking into BISAC. So we have one of the most economical satellites where I'm giving it to Sri Lanka, Myanmar and all these South Asian states for education, for training, for skilling, and I have almost 300 operational transponders. What I want to say here is that we have to be flexible, and see, the private sector is very important, first of all. What my colleague was saying, I was just listening carefully. So Mastercard and all, they're also, again, I will say, for example, they're very important payment gateways. I'm handling DigiLocker as an open data exchange platform. And the next step is a digital wallet. And a digital wallet, we are talking with EU and ITU in UN and all. A digital wallet can't be complete without the partnership of, again, these important gateways. So I think that, again, G20 gave a fillip. Yes, G20 gave a fillip. So why? Because see, our foundational principles are very strong. The fundamental principles of to make it open, secure, scalable, and accessible to all. And again, our foundational DPIs like UPI, Open Data Exchange, and Bhune sir was just here, and we were talking about the data governance and other. I think that's wonder. I think a lot of things are being done. Let me tell you, today we are also thinking of a future network of a resilient one where government have a role to play, and I'm doing something. So today I have my own 7 platforms indigenously developed and designed. Like we have our own app store, own email ID with a private partner, own intranet, own document management system, our own single sign-on, our own cable landing station. We are planning everything because it should be end to end. We can't just say that this is the bottle or this is the glass and these are separate. No, we have to think from end to end. So this is what the government is doing, and the government understand, appreciates the partnership of private sector, and with them we always see that it's a win-win situation.
Thank you, Sanket. Rohini, lastly to you. Microsoft is all over the world and has had an important evolution over the last 30 years, and especially after the cloud business have started. Your partnerships and engagement with the government is only going up. And it'd be great to get your perspective on how you've seen the DPI story evolve in India, but also how you see this playing out around the world.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Let me first start with a couple of observations about how synergistic a hyperscale cloud is with the DPI thinking. That might provide some conceptual thinking here. One, when you talk about DPI, we are talking about qualities like scalability, minimalism, building blocks, interoperability, security. These are fundamental tenets for a hyperscale cloud to work on a global scale. So there is surprising amount of synergy between a DPI thinking and a cloud. Second part I'll present is that as a hyperscale cloud, we think of the cloud as a platform. And our founder has defined a platform as an entity where the people who use the platform get many times more economic value than the value of the platform itself, which is very synergistic to how DPI thinking is. That people who use DPI and create economic value has to be many, many times more than the DPI itself. The reason I bring that up is because I think the ability for governments to look at the hyperscale cloud as a partner in the journey is super critical, because it allows you a running start to understand that the infrastructure part of whatever you want to deploy is by definition, by design, scalable, interoperable, and by the way, open source friendly. Microsoft is one of the largest contributors to open source, including some of our most recent innovations in agentic frameworks like AutoGen. They are open sourced. So it is a bit of a misconception. I want to understand that, understand the nature of how a hyperscale platform works. Now I will give a couple of examples, particularly in India, where, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, the role Microsoft has played. So we heard yesterday Nandan talk about AI as DPI, and he mentioned Bhashini. Now, our research, Microsoft Research, worked with AI for Bharat at IIT Madras over many years to build these language models that they then became part of the National Language Translation Mission and are Bhashini today. So we felt that we brought the thinking of what does it take to collect data, what does it take to create data pipelines at scale and create AI models. So that has been one example of being part of creating a DPI. Second example I would give is some of the largest platforms in India, like eShram, which is on informal workers registry, and eSanjeevani, which is a telemedicine platform which works at tremendous scale and fidelity. These run on the Microsoft Cloud. So the ability for you to run your solutions on a platform that is by design meant to be scalable, secure, and configurable is by definition that synergy. The last part, which is I cannot overemphasize, is the point I made about what is a platform and what is the value that's created on the platform. We are seeing that the ability for startups to build on the cloud, especially digital native startups that are digital first, cloud first, AI first, is going to change the way in which value is created in the Indian economy using these DPIs. I was at a startup event a couple of weeks back, and we presented a point of view there that today, if in India, the software market is about $20 billion. In 2030, it is expected to become $100 billion. That number is based on the fact that many of these startups are able to leverage the digital public infrastructure, not just the identity, data exchange and payments, but some of the upcoming ones like ONDC, like some of the ones we discussed earlier today, to create and solve new problems which would otherwise have required creating plumbing from the grounds up, which would by definition be economically unviable. So I work with startups every day in Bangalore, and to me, that fundamental aspect of economic unlock that startups create using DPI is the most important part of DPI that people have to understand.
Thank you, Rohini. I want to turn to Chandramohan. As the TCS is one of the largest global IT services firms, and as a company, you played an important role in India's DPI journey in many ways the last decade and more. What are your sort of reflections and takeaways from the India journey? But also, I know as a firm, you have much work going on around the world. And what is your experience in learning from what you're doing in many parts of the world on DPI?
Yeah, thank you having me here. See, our experience has been, we are being part of building several government programs. The way we transformed the passport in India is a classic example for the last 15, 20 years now. If you have seen a passport, taking passport before and now, Indian citizens would have experienced the way we have transformed. What I have seen in the recent past, when we are taking the DPI story across globally, we do individual programs in UK, we do railway programs, we do DigiLockers across the world and all that. What I have seen is after the G20 happened in India, there is a very clear sequence. G20 has said that there are 17 SDGs defined, and everybody agreed that without a DPI kind of a tool set, a technology, achieving those goals is very difficult, right, in the shortest possible time. Once the DPI has been identified as a tool set to achieve those goals, now we see a lot of traction from the government agencies also. See, it is what we observe is that it is not necessary that the government has to do everything. Most of the Indian government has played a very good role in the evangelization of the DPI, in also setting up a policy framework, creating institutions like NPCI, like UID, like ONDC, to create institutions, give an independent and autonomousity for them to innovate. And they naturally become a tech-savvy organizations. So what we see globally is that I think what important point is conceptualizing DPI required, which is foundational as well as sectorial DPIs. But once the DPI to be built, which is end of the day objective of the DPI is to give a citizen stack, a convenient citizen stack on the ground. It is also followed a very good methodology, learning from India, which everybody could take it a general methodology. I was sharing that information is that it actually gone to the manufacturing methodology. If you see the UPI story, I'll take one example of UPI, how it is actually resembled to the manufacturing. The switching and settlement is done by NPCI, infrastructure, right? If anybody wants to send money from A to B who are in different banks or different financial institutions, the central switching and settlement is done by NPCI. That's an easier task to do, to be honest with you. It's a technology component. Technology is always easy to do. Now the biggest part is the distribution of that service onto the ground. The banks have played a very important role in distribution, both in terms of creating an ecosystem of capturing the transactions and also acceptance on the transaction account, like authentication, authorization of the account, making the account credited, debited, reconciliation, customer grievances on the transaction. They are become the distributor or a processor of the transaction. Now there is a dealer down below who is actually the TPAPs, third-party application service providers, who played larger role in terms of taking the transactions, creating the merchant ecosystem on the ground. And in fact, the success of UPI is actually laid on the foundation of Prime Minister Jan Dhan Yojana. If there is no account in the bank, you can imagine how UPI would have been today, right? So if I take this example, there is a foundational work that is done on a PMJDY program, that is banking for all. And there is a distribution network which is created to make sure that it is properly go through the proper regulated entity. And there is a TPAP, which is basically fintechs and startups and who actually innovated the way of redefining the experience. And when we see this this same journey applies to Aadhaar, the same journey can apply to any other, even DigiLocker for that matter. The consumption is done by a lot of businesses. The private parties have a larger role in terms of driving this transformation. And whenever we take to one of the countries this experience, see, it is not that the India DPI can be just copy paste into some other. It is not possible because the DPI implementations have a lot of implications on the culture, the geo positioning, and the population there, the education levels, digital literacy, a lot of things influence that, dynamics and all. What is important is this common framework where you actually create an infrastructure which can be created by the government or a government appointed agencies who are tech savvy, and a private parties who come into it and then actually play the role of distribution and then consumption infrastructure. So if you ask me, the Google Pays or Phone Pays or the world is basically a consumption infrastructure who created an infrastructure for consuming the services. But end of the day, the transaction is done by either UID or by NPCI or somebody else. And I think with this learning, what we played a large role in terms of the inclusion of the people. See, second very important factor which I feel is inclusion is not charity. Inclusion is possible business model. I am the classic example. I started working on financial inclusion in the year 2007. Everybody asked me that you are a global banking guy, why you are doing a rural banking, right? But actually today, I am talking about now 17 years from there, I have a sustainable financial inclusion business model where I can survive as a business unit within TCS. It is all about how do you create the business products and services suitable to that segment and price it to the segment that the segment can afford it, right? So it is important that when we are as a private entity trying to do the inclusion on the ground, important is to obviously to change the lives of the people on the ground, but you have to always have a sustainable program to run it for a long run. That means unless it is profit oriented, you created a model which can actually sustain for a long, no businesses can run on it. So I think from a private partnership with the government, especially the progressive governments which we have in India, I think we see a lot of synergy between public and private in terms of delivering those citizens stack to the ground.
Thank you so much, Chandramohan. I wanted to pick up one of the points you just mentioned. I'll come back to you for this question and would love to expand the discussion. I fully agree that there is no one-size-fits-all solution in DPI, right? But one of the things that technology has done and continues to do is standardization of many things, right? So if you go back to at least my time, back late 80s, early 90s, companies would build their own email, right? Their own word processor and so on and so forth. But what we've seen over the last 35 years is a standardization and so back in the day, even companies would say, look, but I'm unique and I need something different, right? So what we have seen in the last 35 years is a lot of harmonization, standardization that's happened while companies have adapted, right? Countries are still struggling. Everybody thinks they're unique. Yes, they are unique in many ways, but I think the question I have, and this may be useful for many others to respond as well, what is it that can be standardized, that can scale, and what is it that needs to be customized, right? That's a fine balance. Last year, Carnegie released a paper at last GTS called DPI as a package service. Essentially with the idea of recognizing that, just to give you some statistics, there are 70 countries in the world that have a population of under 1 million people, right? Now, I would find it very hard. We were talking to my friend Pete from New Zealand here. Cook Island in their neighborhood has 15,000 people, and he said it's fewer people than in this building. So how do you expect a Cook Island or any such small country to build ID and payments. And so what's the, especially having, you've seen the tech sector for many years yourself, what's the degree of standardization that's possible? What needs to be customized? I think you have some reflections on that would be great to get.
I think the foundational DPIs which we are talking about, which are standard, like giving identity. So we talk about giving identity to humans, right? Giving identity, India, we never spoke about it, giving identity to cattle, right? We have Pasu Aadhaar, right? Giving identity to institutions who are giving employment called Udyog Aadhaar, right? Identity as a subject is standard. The way in which you communicate, the protocols, or the way in which you transmit data, the technology is standard. The features could be customized based on. See, I tried to do financial inclusion after doing in India with a great story that 70% of India's Prime Minister Jan Dhan Yojana I could contribute. We went to Bangladesh. The complete story is different there, right? Because of the local religious, cultural, various aspects which are there. What I'm trying to say is that what is standard is obviously the technology part, which can be standard provided you build it on open standards and the way in which you make it interoperable, secure, privacy by design. These are the common principles across the globe. There is nothing, no changes in that, except rules of the game might change from country to country, but they are all configurable. But the point is that how do I make it adopted on the ground is the biggest challenge. And that's where the private players plays bigger role. So government will not be able to take it to the ground. Government can say that I want to have a direct benefit transfer scheme. But how do you take it onto the ground is actually is an ecosystem play. It includes the sponsor banks. It includes the destination banks where the guy maintains an account. It includes the interoperable agency, like where we have done Aadhaar payment bid system in NPCI. But it is all about you create the standard technology framework and protocol to reach to the ground. That's very important. But the customizations and parameters are more to do with the how you deliver onto the ground and what makes it successful. Unless you understand the local dynamics, adoption is very difficult. You can build great systems, but essentially, unless you have the local nuances, like example, language is an example, religion is an example, right? Some customs which you have to follow. So those are the things which will go on a customization. But I think broadly, if you build a technology with a open architecture and open protocols and frameworks, and I'm sure they are reusable across with a little tweaking here and there. Yeah.
I get your point and fully agree. I just want to play devil's advocate and maybe bring in either Heba or Rohini to say, look, there's only one Microsoft Word around the world. There's only one Mastercard around the world. You don't customize, I don't think, a lot for any country. Let's play devil's advocate and spar with Chandramohan for a minute, if you will.
Yeah, let me since I work for a company which actually has the whole gamut, which means if I look at our modern work, it's a product. You don't customize it by and large. We've got business applications which you could customize. One, of course, every customer rightfully believes they are unique. As soon as you start to customize, you are going down a path of making that product only for you. And therefore, any innovation that happens at scale on the platform, you are away from it. You're going to have to constantly reinvest in making sure that you've caught up with the customization. So it's a very healthy tension. I believe system integrators, I'm sort of really being specific. I think system integrators have a very unique role to play here to create that or manage that healthy tension between what is a product versus what has to be customized. And I will add another point in there called configuration. There are ways to create products or deploy products which only require configuration changes, not code changes. So the ability to ensure that you are delivering to your end customer in a way that is able to benefit from the fact that product innovation will move at a very fast pace, and how can your customer keep up and leverage the platform and product innovations as fast as they happen, rather than having to constantly invest in customizations. There is one middle ground called configuration, and system integrators have a really strong role to play here in creating that healthy tension between the end customer and the platform.
I'll go quickly to Hiba and then come to Vajayanti and then Sanket last year.
No, I mean, contrary to common perception, there is a lot of customization that happens in every deployment because every ecosystem is different. Who are the main players? Are they banks, fintechs, telcos? Also the economics are different in every context. So I was myself surprised to realize how much every deployment in Mastercard involves quite a bit of customization. It might not be technology per se, but a lot of in terms of how you configure the ecosystem and define the rules and participation and so on involves quite a bit of customization. So yeah, we would love to be able to have like ready-made, but I think countries are pretty different, and that's something that comes out in a lot of the recent discussion.
No, fair. I was just trying to create a bit of a war between Chandra Mohan and the two of you, but didn't work out. Vajayanti and Sanket, and we'll go to the audience.
Yes, I agree with those prior speakers that in many ways it's just not the technology. So DPI is much more than technology, and so so some of the things, it's sort of the frameworks, the principles, the good practices, the lessons learned, and I think that's one of the benefits of the deployment of a DPI in now multiple countries, over 70 countries, where it's what we love is this iterative approach. So you have the high-level principles, the good practices, the frameworks but then get deployed at the country level, has to be customized because you have different laws, you have different institutions and institutional arrangements and different sort of leaders, as well as the capacity in country. And so what we've seen is that there are some elements, for example, the good practices and approaches for enrollment or issuance of ID, and the lessons across that. But laws will have to be different and things like that.
I think it's a very interesting discussion going on here, and on part of the government, Ministry of Electronics and IT, we keep on doing, we are rolling out. We're talking to many foreign countries for helping them in these digital IDs for national DPIs and all. So basically, again, I think the technology is the answer, and there is now between like what the views we are listening, we have to maintain a fine balance. There is a fine balance, how much, where to customize, to adapt, and between the cross-border collaboration, I will say. For me, let me tell you one good thing, what we are doing, because the work of digital ID was mentioned and the standards of TSO, technical standards. So India will be soon coming up with the global technology standards for digital ID. So today I have some 2 billion codes, 1.4 mine, and 60 million are friendly countries where we are rolling it out. So you have listened about MOSIP and all. So almost 25 countries they are working. In 5 countries there is a rollout: Ethiopia, Philippines, Morocco, national rollout. So what I understand is every country is different, every region is different, every place is different. The culture, the local part, the political part, the social part, the economical part, the geostrategic, geopolitical equation and all. So it's very different. We have to see that if we are implementing and rolling out something, I don't know if it should be a product or what, but anyway, the fundamental principles to be open source and all are very important, to be interoperable. And that is where India, Ministry of Electronics and IT, we are very successful. And that is why our foundational DPIs like DigiLocker, the Open Data Exchange, the digital ID, they are sought. I think many things are there, but technology is the answer, and you just can't say that one thing will fit into all. No, that's.
Thank you. I want to, before we open up to the audience questions, I know there are a lot of expertise in the room, and I'm sure we'll have a lively discussion. I want to invite Imran, who's a member of parliament from South Africa, to talk a little bit about the G20 work and where DPI is coming up in the G20 work in South Africa. Imran, please.
Thank you, Madhukar, and thank you to the External Affairs Ministry of the Government of India and to Carnegie India for this wonderful opportunity of being here. And this is my first visit as an MP. I've been here before, so whenever I come to India, it's like coming home. India and South Africa have a very strong relationship, both culturally. As a matter of interest, 2.74% of our population are people from the Indian diaspora, representing 1.7 million Indians. I think it was the largest Indian population out of India and probably still remains. And I think secondly is also that India and South Africa share a common colonial past, a past of exclusion, and then a post-colonial past, where we need to build inclusive economies and we really need to get back into society. India has been far longer than us in this journey, I think about 77 years, and we are just 31 years into this journey post-democracy. So we got a long road to freedom. Interestingly enough as well, some context into G20 is that South Africa is the fourth of the developing countries that hosted the presidency. And that has been advancing this agenda of global south and development countries. And I think it's crucially important that the audience understands the geopolitical circumstances, that we know what's taking place here. I mean, in 2022, I think it was Indonesia. In 2023, India, and I know the DPI took center stage in amongst the resolutions that took place. In last year, it was Brazil. And 2025, it's South Africa. So we have this huge mantle of responsibility of advancing the agenda and the growth and the re-emergence of developing countries and the global south. And what's also very unique about this G20 is that we are the only African country that's part of the G20, and it is the first time that the G20 is being hosted by an African country. So we also have this additional responsibility of ensuring that Africa is not left behind and that the interest of Africa. And therefore, I think maybe I'd pause and say that I was very deeply humbled and excited when I saw African countries like Morocco, like Uganda, Malawi, and Nigeria share with us their journey through DPI. So finally, just to conclude the context there, is that interestingly enough, what happens is after us, and that is why it was important for us to show this chain that way we're carrying this presidency of the global south and developing. Next year, it goes to America. The presidency goes to America. So we can understand the geopolitical circumstances we are in. Whether or not America advances the gains that have been done over the past 4 years remains to be seen. So needless to say, as the last of the developing countries in this four, we want to certainly use it as an opportunity to advance the interest of developing countries. Now, we've identified 4 areas that we really want to focus on under what is called the G20 Digital Economy Working Group, which is a working group that is meeting and will meet until the November summit. I was on a call last night with the Director General of the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, and she had chaired the DUG, the Digital Economy Working Group, for the last 5 days in South Africa. So we've identified 4 areas that are focus areas for us. The one is digital connectivity. The second is DPI. The third is digital innovation ecosystems. And the fourth is the regulation of AI. These are the key priority areas that the working group is focusing on. And hopefully we'll find when we meet in November, this group would have refined, interrogated, and come up with certain resolutions that will take this G20 forward. Now, why is connectivity crucially important for us in Africa? Because it is the basis of any digital transformation. I mean, I heard yesterday something very simple but profound, that AI is the terrace and digital connectivity is the foundation. So needless to say, if we don't get digital connectivity in Africa, and in development countries right, we are not going to get off the mark. And digital connectivity talks to two challenges. One is infrastructure, and the other is cost. And that's an area we want to deal with. We want to deal with the issues of cost, particularly around our mobile network operators. What is the cost of connectivity? And we're finding in South Africa particularly, the costs are huge in relation to the rest of the world. And finally, I think as I pause, for me, so I'll be very excited as we look forward to welcoming and hosting the G20 summit in November, where our group will try to address, just in terms of AI, interestingly enough, at very huge conversations that have been taking place within Parliament and the Portfolio Committee where I sit in, is around AI. And one of the lessons of my learnings from here, amongst the many, and I think one profound learning, I think it was Shankar in the very few first minutes, because I've come here to understand DPI and how can that help my country to really get this entire challenges of interoperability, because we have similar challenges, like we have a huge cash economy, we have a huge rural base, we have a huge influx of foreigners that have come in. How do we get them to be meaningful contributors, taxpayers to the national fiscus so we can have sufficient revenue base to fund infrastructure? So I think DPI and starting with a digital identification is the basis. So I took that, there was a learning I took yesterday, and that was the issue around DPI must talk to an outcome. Understand the meta friction, I think that was the term.
Yeah.
So it is something that I've been dreaming about last night. I've been trying to itemize what is that common denominator, the problem that my country is facing, that digital ID. Let me understand that meta friction. So as I land, I would really be excited to be hosting the rest of the world in November, and really we welcome yourselves and the audience here to join us in November. And thank you so much again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Imran. It's great to get the insight. I know the South African presidency is a few months in already and would love to figure out how we can continue to engage. We have a lot of questions in the audience. If you can put your hand up, we can go from this side of the room and yeah.
Hi, my name is Rahul. I'm an independent consultant at the intersection of tech and geopolitics. I've had a long career in the digital and technology world, so I understand the technological model of DPI pretty well. What I'm particularly keen to ask Sanket ji in this case is, what is the commercial and the relational model that India is using, and sorry for sounding transactional for the times, to put this model out in the world? Right? And I've had a word with a couple of MEA folks, but I'm not getting the exact answer. I don't know if there's one that can be shared publicly.
Yeah, there's second hand there and the third hand here.
My name is Dr. Sarvjit Dudeja. I want to understand the way we are talking about DPI and digital economy. Are we moving to our cryptocurrency or this type of currency in world? Even President Trump is also encouraging cryptocurrency during his campaign. He was encouraging instead of dollar. So what is the situation in the rest of the world?
Thanks.
Thank you. One question is, address the panel, but particularly to Ms. Sanket. We're talking about the connectivity, the connectivity, digital connectivity countrywide, as far as India is concerned. A large geography and large population. Now, with the coming in of the AI, with multiple languages coming up, and related derivatives from that in terms of transactions and services, what kind of a challenge is that for the government? Because BharatNet, I'm reading, doesn't cover the entire country. So what kind of challenge does it present both for the country as such and also to the other users of that facility? That's one question.
Yeah.
The second one is you talked about the small countries like Cook Island with small population. Now, it could even be, I think it could even be thought in terms of commercially viable kind of an enterprise where you create that and there are a lot of benefit derived from that, because obviously this leads to monetization of their activities. But more than that, because the fact it provides the facility or the infrastructure for mobilization of the community, the whole lot of other challenges which actually can be addressed through this kind of community mobilization, and thereby thereby creating the, let's say, the buffer against the shocks, external and internal shocks,
Sure.
actually the economy actually also gets better. Thank you.
David Roos at the back.
Thank you, and first of all, thanks Shruti and all the Carnegie team and the government of India for hosting
Can you speak up a little bit, David?
this excellent summit. My question would be, frankly speaking, I think we hear a lot, technology is not the problem, but technology is the answer. And then we spend a lot of time talking about technology. So my question is maybe to Joint Secretary Mr. Bontwe would be, what was the most important policy plumping that you've done before 2016 to allow all of the DPI marketplace? And what would be your first recommendation to a country who has not done yet that kind of heavy lifting on the ground?
Thank you. I think those are great questions. You want to start off, Heba, or do you want to react to anything at all? In no particular order. Anyone wants, I know you've got direct questions.
All bombarded on me. Thank you so much. But fine, I'm very happy, because this is what is needed. For the first question, I think the technological model of DPI. So we have started working in more than 50 countries on all these foundational DPIs, sharing them on the open data exchange and all. It may be the DigiLocker, it may be the digital ID. And let me tell you, when I talk about a digital ID, we all know, or maybe let me tell you that many of the countries, the digital ID was not successful. So why India? Because there are some silent features in our own model, the authority, the Aadhaar and all that. Now coming to your right question, and what I have listened is about the commercialized, the commercial or the realized model, right? So interestingly, what I see or I feel, and I'm working as because I'm looking into DPI as a subject matter in government of India. So the government is very serious. It brought the India mission, and it gave the DPI as a subject to me to look, because it's like the Ministry of Finance, MEAB, all are working together as a team. So here we are not seeing as of now any commercial gains or something sort of that. No way. It's more the trust model. What I feel, it's a trust, and as of now, we think that our New Delhi leaders' declaration of G20 is very much clear how to go about it with the fundamental principles for the global south. So I think that is your short answer. Coming to the third part about the connectivity and the AI, the languages and all, I think sir asked me. So yes, that is a challenge today, not only for India. It may be for Europe, it may be for Africa, it may be for a state like Uttar Pradesh, it may be state for Northeast and all, because it's diverse. But the beauty lies here to get them all together. A game changer example is Bhashini. You mentioned AI, and I have Bhashini. So Bhashini, I have like 35 language models now, where from text to text, voice to text and all, we are working. Also with the 6 UN languages, like Russian, Arabic, Chinese, English and all. That is one answer with an fascinating, inclusive and accessible DPI like Bhashini, and I think that should suffice. Coming to the third part, also you mentioned about Togo, right? Infrastructure, yeah. So I think I will also relate it to the last part. Like earlier, what was that? How was the ecosystem built? My friend there had asked, and what I understood, that pre-2016, obviously, see, there is some base infrastructure. Overnight, you just can't come and make some roads and bridges and all. There is some old brownfield project, and then you expand it. If you take the physical part, in the digital, even then we need some. For example, let's take telecom. There is some connectivity like 2G. We can't directly go to 6G or 7G. But yes, India have leapfrog. See the UPI experience. See the Bharat stage experience, my friend, is like the European pollution norms, and we directly went from Bharat stage 4 to Bharat stage 6 and many more. I have some more examples where India have really leapfrog into the technology. But yes, the earlier, the main what I felt you were asking is, we had a basic infrastructure where it was all built, but the last decade, since 2014-15, when the Digital India campaign took over, we can see the results and the success of the Indian digital transformation story. Thank you.
We're at time, but if anyone wants to add some last comments, please do. I'm sure it'd be
See, I think
enlightening for the audience.
my experience has been in the successful DPI adoption. Creation is easier, adoption is tough. Okay. Is that you identify the right use case to drive the DPI story. If you take Aadhaar example I have seen on the ground in the villages, okay. My practical experience is from the ground. If you see that the DBT program actually driven the Aadhaar, people have understood that if I don't have a mechanism to identify myself, how government will actually give me the benefit? Similarly, when you look at DigiLocker today, if you just put a DigiLocker and say start using it, nobody will use it. Suppose if the university says that I will recognize the certificate connected to DigiLocker, or I will recognize your identity connected to DigiLocker, that use case drives the adoption. I think what is important I have seen, whether you can take UPI example also, demonetization, UPI coincidentally happened similar time, then COVID took place. And smartphone revolution took place in India. So I used to think if a transaction has to happen on a touch phone, which is not hygienic to do, how people will move to touch phone. I used to like BlackBerry. But the point of the matter is the situations and the incidents and the use cases driven that. One is smartphone penetration, affordability of the data connectivity, then the Jan Dhan Yojana, then UPI infrastructure, then you have the demonetization and the COVID. I think there are several factors influences the adoption. So the use case for any DPI to sustain long-term use case, strong use case is required. That's my.
Did you want to add? Bhajan?
Just quickly to add, we now are engaged in 70 countries, about $2 billion invested just in ID alone. And we do see countries learning from one another. So many have come to India and been inspired. We know the global public good of MOSIP that was initially inspired by Aadhaar, but is a broader global public good and has been adopted by a number of countries. In several of the countries we're engaging, so Morocco, half of the population is now registered. In Philippines, 90 million people registered. In Nigeria and others. And so, but I agree completely that it's the use case adoption. And to go back to the theme of this, I think we often are focused on the 1, 2, 3 use cases of government services, of public sector services. And I think more and more we need to start thinking.
Practical thing. So basically when you do it, it's more, what we are doing is the proof of concept and the pilot. Because the pilot is the base and that helps in the national rollout of any DPI where you want to scale it in any foreign nation.
So I think just to go back to saying that I think bringing in private sector innovation and use cases should also be at the heart of the initial 1 or 2 use case adoption.
No, we're at time. Did Rohini or Hiba want to closing comments? Anything?
No, I wanted to address the point the gentleman made about technology versus technology. I think, there's a stage to it.
Yeah.
The comments that were made in terms of driven by a use case, driven by a real problem to be solved, one starts with that use case, then there are initial technology building blocks that address helping them. Then when you scale, at that time you may have different technology elements that come in, but it is to start with is a use case and bring the people together and making sure the policymakers and the mind share is there. So I think it's that journey that one has to think about.
It's a lot of learning. I must ask you to then wrap it up for us. Hiba, please. Yes.
Thank you. So I'll go back to the theme. I think we've gone a long way in terms of defining the DPI, understanding what it's about, building the public sector role. And last year we filled a big gap when again the Safeguard initiative was launched, and now it's in its second year of iteration. I hope that in the South Africa G20 that it will launch deeper work on the role of the private sector and really better understanding of how to bring the private sector in and what are the business models. And I think this will complete the circle and get us to the end.
On that very constructive note, thank you very much. A big round of applause for all of our panelists.